Has anyone noticed how recent Blizzard releases are basically just early access titles in disguise that everyone seems to be okay with? Don't get me wrong here, Diablo 4 is a fairly complete experience, and the core gameplay here is already fantastic. But to me, it feels like they really chose to forego the years of innovation and lessons that should have been learned from Diablo 3 in order to get this live service MMO light version of the game out as soon as possible. And I mean, that definitely worked because a lot of people actually paid extra to play this early access equivalent of the game 4 days sooner. And yeah, fundamentally the game is already solid, but many of its problems were actually already solved in Diablo 3. And the worst part of this is, by season 3 or 4, when a lot of these issues are finally fixed, and Diablo 4 starts to hit harder than cold water from your bathroom sink at 2 AM, most of the player base will have already moved on from the game. And I'm not only talking about just the tourist casuals that boost the game's sales at launch, but also some of the dedicated ARPG players. I mean, especially if you consider the Path of Exile 2 is releasing soon. But before I talk about what I think are the good and bad parts of Diablo 4, let's take a brief look at my history with the franchise so you know where I'm coming from, and also if you should even give two shits about what I have to say about the game. This might be a bit unnecessary, so if you don't really care and want to get straight into the next part, skip to this timestamp. The original Diablo 1 and 2 are games that I have never even attempted to play. I played a tiny bit of Diablo 2 Resurrected when it was in early access, but I did not put any meaningful amount of time into it at all. In all honesty, I feel like I'm far too spoiled by modern quality of life features to really enjoy either game at this point. As for Diablo 3, while I admit it had a rocky launch and there were definitely some questionable design choices at times, I have a very long and wild history with the game. I originally bought it on PC at release. I even bought this Diablo 3 Steel series mouse because I thought it was cool at the time. I mean, did anybody ever use this thing? It was not very good. Anyways, a cool fun fact about Diablo 3 at that time was that I couldn't even run the launcher to install the game because my PC was that bad. But not long after, I eventually had a decent PC and I played it for quite some time, and then I bought it again on Xbox 360, and then yet again on PlayStation 4 release, and then I went back to the PC version again because consoles didn't even have seasons at the time. You know, thinking back on it, I didn't even think the game was that good, but I still bought the game like 4 times. What was I thinking exactly? Anyways, I've played many other ARPGs since then, and at some point I switched to Path of Exile and have been playing that almost exclusively, with the occasional dive back into Diablo 3 if the season gimmicks seemed interesting, but most of the time they were kind of short and bad. In total, I would say that I have several thousand hours across just Path of Exile and Diablo 3 alone, not counting other ones, so I'm at least an ARPG casual. Alright, now it's time to finally talk about Diablo 4. The good, the bad, the live service, and the what the fuck is even going on in this game. The first point I want to get out of the way fast and early, let's just rip off the band-aid. I'm talking about the microtransactions. As of right now, the MTX is exclusively just overpriced skins, emotes, mounts, etc. Majority of them don't even look good in my opinion. Honestly, most of the free in-game cosmetics you can unlock are quite good, and I'm not really going to talk about the mounts since they're a bit buggy and frustrating at times. There are some cool ones you can get in the game, so I don't really feel pressured into buying a skin for one. Plus, I'm faster on foot in most circumstances, and I teleport most of the distance I travel anyways, so it doesn't really bother me. Overall, I don't really care about the shop as long as Blizzard doesn't add anything that's super pay to win, but keep in mind that currently we haven't actually seen the upcoming battle pass, but I swear to god, the second they try and sell me an XP boost or an additional stash tab, that's a -1 on the score, buddy. But let's talk about what you'll be primarily doing for your first 24 hours or so as a new player. The campaign, the story, and the cinematics. The campaign experience is usually what I would say has to be the worst part of any ARPG. It's always a long X amount of hours grind that you have to get through in order to reach the fun part of the game. Sometimes you only have to do it once, but usually it's every season or league. But surprisingly for Diablo 4, that's backwards. I have to say that the campaign is actually very good. There were a few parts throughout the acts that felt a bit stretched out, and the ending felt a bit rushed, but overall the storytelling, voice acting, and cinematics were all spot on. The story was also written in a way where you don't really need to play the previous titles or watch a recap video to get a feel for and understand the lore. And without actually spoiling the ending, it's an obvious setup for potential expansion slash future DLC, which I'm all for, honestly. In terms of the side quests, which you don't have to do any side quests at all. I mean, usually you can just do a bunch of side quests while doing the main quest. It kind of works out. I don't know if it's efficient or not, but a lot of them are very repetitive. I mean, there are just a ton of quests that are help me out, I'm a poor widow innocent villager, psych, I'm actually a demon slash ghost slash bandit slash bad guy slash what the fuck ever, I'm gonna kill you now. And then you kill them in one hit, and then it's like, oh, well, the quest is over. Then you get like 1% of a level's worth of experience, and then you're like, damn, why did I do that? But most of the larger side quest chains have interesting stories, well-written dialogue, and interesting NPC interactions. Since there's no way of telling which side quest is good, which side quest is fast, which side quest is a piece of trash, I would probably recommend just skipping them all, honestly. But overall, I would say that the campaign experience is a massive W and probably one of the strongest parts of Diablo 4. Alright, now let's talk about the content and experience immediately following the campaign up till about level 70 or so. After finishing the campaign, your main goal is to complete the level 50 and 70 capstone dungeons to unlock World Tier 3 and World Tier 4 respectively. It's very important to progress into these higher world tiers as soon as you can. While I don't think it's worth getting boosted because then you won't be able to actually kill mobs in that tier anyways, if you can do it like 10 levels sooner, you should, because in doing so you unlock the sacred and ancestral tier items, which, let's be honest here, they're just gear pieces with higher percent rolls on them. But due to the level scaling in Diablo 4, the mobs are constantly getting stronger while you are constantly getting weaker. So the sooner you unlock these, the better off you're going to be. But in order to actually level up and get gear to do these capstone dungeons, you have a whole buffet of open world content you can choose to do. I'll touch on these in a little bit more detail shortly, but there are dungeons, nightmare dungeons, cellars, events, helltides, legions, whispers, world bosses, and even PvP to a lesser degree. But there's also a secondary goal that kind of depends on two factors. The first one is how much do you care about min-maxing your account, and the second one is how much do you really just hate yourself. Of course, I'm talking about the somewhat infamous Renown grind and collecting all 160 statues of Lilith. For me personally, the first thing that I did was collect all the statues and then max out my Renown region by region. But since these things are account wide, I would say that if you're a super casual player only looking to make a single character and you don't mind missing out on a ton of potential player power, you could skip this or do just a part of it. But for me, the rewards were just far too great to miss out on. Each statue of Lilith gives you some renown, most of them give you +2 a stat, a couple of them will give you a paragon point, and a few of them will give you max obol capacity, but I'm not gonna ever mention that word again because it's dog shit, so don't worry about it. In total, for collecting all 160 of them, you receive +68 to every single stat and +4 paragon points. But that's actually baby tier compared to what you get from maxing out all of your renown. There are 5 tiers of renown, each with a different reward, and then 5 different regions to have the max renown in. If you reach tier 3 in every region, you get not 1, not 2, but 10 skill points. But if you go above and beyond and complete tier 5 in every region, you also get 20 paragon points. This is the equivalent of a 15 level advantage against someone who has not done the renown grind. And since these are account wide, if you finally want to roll an alt character from level 1, you already have 10 skill points. That's enough to get your basic skill, a core skill, and a defensive or movement ability right from the start of the game. And just think about the casuals that were like wanting to PvP and stand a chance, but they don't want to have to do this. Yeah, good fucking luck. For me personally, I hated the grind, but it was just such a huge loss to skip out on. But thankfully, you only have to do it one time on your account, and it seems that for the most part, it will carry on to the seasonal round. But again, that hasn't really happened, so I can't say for sure if it'll be implemented in a way where it's good or you'll still have to do a bunch of bullshit. Overall, I'd say renown bad, statues bad, but in total, the level 50 to 70 progression and completing the capstone dungeons were really fun and a very solid part of the game. Alright, so you've completed your renown grind, unlocked World Tier 4, now what? Well, in my opinion, this is where the game falls off tremendously. Keep in mind that it somewhat depends on how fast you get all your gear slots kitted out with full ancestral. Maybe you're finished by 73, maybe it takes you until level 80 if you're unlucky. However long it takes you, at that point the game is basically done. And the reason for this is simply you no longer have anything to realistically achieve. Gear upgrades become looking for a 2% better roll on the exact same piece you already have equipped, dropped, levels become a tedious grind for Paragon points that'll boost your main stat by 5 or your damage by 2.5%, and don't even get me started on these best in slot uniques that only about 5 people globally have even dropped yet. And yeah, you could go spend another 40 hours leveling to 100, but why would you? To kill Uber Lilith, if your build is even meta enough to be able to, for loot that only drops one time, and this mount that is way worse than this Legion one, what the fuck, the mount's shit. Or maybe you want to flex your big damage numbers against a world boss every 6 hours. There is literally no good reason for you to actually play past level 80 unless you are getting so scanned by RNG that you cannot finish your build, or you just don't want to play another character. And to make matters worse, the game actively deters you from trying out other builds for your class. If your class has other good builds and you're not playing the best one already, you know how it is. In most cases, not only will a second build feel worse to play the later you decide to reroll, unless you save up a full set of GG gear, but what about the stash space to store all that gear? Even for a single character, it feels extremely limited. You only get a total of 4 tabs, and you need a quarter of a tab to store gear for a single build. That doesn't count any uniques you want to keep, or high rolled aspects that you can only have like 15 fucking slots for. What the fuck, make this bigger. And then you have to waste a bunch of slots for gems because they only stack to 50, and you know the game's gonna have higher tiers eventually too, so you probably want to have more than a stack, maybe 2 stacks. Maybe you like leveling other characters and you want to actually use gems instead of not having any at all, even though they're not that big of a deal, so you want to keep all of the types with all the tiers like a psychopath. I mean, maybe it's tolerable if you're only playing 1 or 2 builds for your single class. Or maybe you waste one of your 10 character slots making a mule. I mean, it's pretty bad. And to actually re-roll your character, you have to spend like 700,000 gold refunding 58 skill points that you now have to socket and deal with. And that's not even the bad part, because if you're max level, you have like fucking 225 Paragon points to refund and there's no magic reset button. Plus, if the build you're rerolling uses different glyphs, have fun running like 50 nightmare dungeons to level those up. And do you know how long it actually takes to swap builds in Diablo 3? 10 fucking seconds. Why was this a solved problem 10 years ago, but not fixed now? But enough complaining about that. Let's talk about the actual content and events you'll be doing in Diablo 4. First up are the dungeons and their nightmare counterpart. The funny thing about dungeons in Diablo 4 is that they are equally the only worthwhile content to spend your time doing and the least engaging and fun. While on paper dungeons sound great, I mean there's a lot of them, 115 to be precise, there's multiple objectives, plenty of loot, randomized layouts, etc. But on just the fundamental level alone, the dungeon design is fucked. I was gonna say flawed, but it's fucked. To me, it feels like they were just designed to be annoying. And after really thinking about it for some time now, I think I know why I feel this way. In a game like Path of Exile, which if you recall from earlier, I've played way too much of, your dungeon equivalent would be maps. And when clearing those maps, you don't really have a set objective, and you would think that that's less interesting than actually having an objective to complete. But it's fundamentally just go in there and at your own pace, kill as many or as few mobs as you feel like. You can kill the boss if you want, skip it to go faster if your build sucks. But in Diablo 4, when you enter a dungeon, you have multiple objectives that you are forced to complete, with many of them being a total pain in the ass. There are a ton of dead ends and constant backtracking around already cleared parts of the dungeon in order to actually find and finish all those objectives. And on top of all that, there's hardly any variety once you've done it a few times, because there's only a handful of objectives and like 5 different bosses. At some point along that line, the core gameplay loop changed from kill mobs get loot and became do chores get loot, which just feels way less fun. And nightmare dungeons are somehow worse at this than the regular ones. Not only do you have to do the same backtrack filled chores, but you also have all these negative affixes on top of it to make it even more of a pain in the ass. I'm not so bothered by dealing less damage or mobs having more health. It's all the affixes that make things spawn, chase around you and explode, or make you stand in a bubble so you don't get one shot by the invulnerable lightning strike from outer space, or the one that makes mobs drain your resource. And don't even act like this is balanced by having one positive affix on them. What the fuck is 10% more damage or 20% more gold going to do for me? Oh great, now I only deal 50% less damage instead of 60 with this positive affix. Awesome, isn't that fun to play? And what do you actually get for all this added trouble over just a regular dungeon? Well, you can level up your glyphs, plus you get a tiny bit more loot and XP. And even if you're in a super high tier nightmare dungeon fighting level 140 mobs, they drop the same same loot as the garbage level 70 mobs you were fighting 25 hours ago. Doesn't that just sound like a super perfect and enticing in-game loop for you to enjoy for millions of hours? No? Well, it's not. But do you know what's actually fun? Most of the open world content. Specifically, I'm talking about legions, Helltides, and world bosses. These are the three main MMO-light activities of the game. Gathering legions spawn every approximately 30 minutes and last for about 10. They are essentially a race against the timer type event. Your main goal is to kill enough waves of mobs in order to summon servants of hell, and after you kill 3 of them, or the time runs out, it'll spawn the final boss, and upon successfully killing it, you will complete the event and earn 1 to 3 chests full of loot depending on how many servants you were able to kill. I'd give this like a 8 out of 10 because it's super quick, get a bunch of loot, and it's kind of fun to do. Helltides spawn every 75 minutes and last for about an hour. Basically, a Helltide will take over an area on the map, and for that hour while it's active, you'll earn aberrant cinders from monsters and the events you complete, and your goal is to collect enough to open tortured gifts, which are basically just loot chests with a bunch of legendaries of a specific type. Overall, I'd say it's like a 7 out of 10. It's not the best to do, but you can get some good loot and mats. World bosses spawn every 6 hours and also last for about 10 minutes. World bosses are, well, like their name would suggest, big ass bosses that spawn on the map and you kill with a group of players. Although if your build is strong enough and nobody else shows up, you can kill it solo. It's not that hard. There are currently 3 different world bosses, with each one giving you a cache full of items 1 time per week. The main benefit is you just get a pile of loot with almost guaranteed legendary, and if you do your caches, you get a bunch of legendaries from those. So pretty rewarding and overall really fun to take down most of the time. Honestly, I think that all 3 of these events are not only pretty fun to participate in, but also really well designed. But there are some downsides here, with the main one being that none of them are really that rewarding or even worth doing aside from early on to assist your gear progression. You can get Forgotten Souls for crafting from Helltides and usually a couple legendaries here and there from each event, but really if you just grind out nightmare dungeons, it's way more time efficient. But the one good thing about them not being mandatory content is that you don't really have to log on every 6 hours to kill a boss or go hit up the Legion every 30 minutes. You can just kind of do them whenever they happen to be up while you're playing. But what about the other open world content like Tree of Whispers and PvP? Honestly, I haven't really done that much of either one. I did a few whispers for some loot at the beginning, but I stopped once I realized that it was mostly garbage and that they're basically just bounties from Diablo 3, which was something I already hated. And almost every time I went into a PvP zone, it was either dead empty or nobody was actually willing to fight. Both of these are, in my opinion, a very hard pass, and if you want the PvP mount, just go cheese it. The last piece of actual in-game content I want to talk about are the Cellars. I'm just gonna say it straight up, Cellars are hot garbage, an actual waste of time and space, which is such a shame because I actually really like Cellars and I thought that would be cool. Just like tiny rooms so with mobs to kill and a loot chest at the end, that sounds awesome. But unfortunately it's not. Not even with the super rare Goblin Cellar is this bullshit even worth wasting your time on. Now let's talk about the classes themselves, since I actually have quite a fair bit of experience across all of them and I want to give my brief opinion on each one. First up is the Barbarian. I played a ton of Whirlwind Barb in Diablo 3. I think it was by far my favorite class to play in most seasons due to its chilled nature of just holding right click and spinning to win. In Diablo 4 there are some nice improvements to the class, like being able to wield 4 different weapons, but it's really a pain in the ass to level and there isn't that much build variety since most of them use all 3 shouts, but it's very strong in the end game and overall a pretty solid class. Next up is the Necromancer. I like minions. You know why I like minions? They play the game for me and they provide me with an extra layer of defense. But in Diablo 4, minions are garbage. What even happened here, guys? Even the minion AI in Diablo 3 was way better. In Diablo 4, minions are super slow, always attacking the wrong thing, and they hit like a toothpick compared to most other skills. And most importantly, if you aren't heavily investing into their survivability, like every single passive for each type of minion, they will not stay alive. And you know what makes this fact even worse? Not only would it be less work for you to have to micromanage, but some of the bonuses you get for just sacrificing your minions and not having any are massive. Honestly, the class feels really slow to play and the non-minion builds are way stronger, so for me personally it's not as fun. I wanted to play minions and I did play minions until about level 52 or so, and then at that point I swapped over to sacrificing all of them and playing Bone Spear straight up, and it was so much better. I'm I don't think I'm going back to minions at all. And then there's the Sorcerer, an absolute monster of a class for leveling despite getting hard nerfed after the beta. The build diversity is there, and the class looks great to play. You might even think I'm about to say it's the best class in the game, but actually it's extremely squishy, and despite having a lot of viable builds, each Sorcerer build is either really great at single target or really great at AoE clearing, and is absolutely garbage at the opposite type, meaning that if the build you like to play is good at AoE clearing, then content requiring single target like world bosses or bosses at the end of dungeons are just gonna fucking suck. Not to mention that since the class is so squishy, actually pushing higher tiers, you just get one shot by the most mundane monsters. Like you don't even need like a rare, you just like die to a white trash spider. Very solid to level with, but really falls off in the end game and ends up being overall a pretty average class. Now let's talk about the class I picked at launch and have played the most of, the Rogue. I'm not really sure what actually compelled me into picking the Rogue as my first class, but I can say that it's still by far my favorite. It's really solid at leveling, very strong at endgame, doing basically any and all sorts of content. It's super fast and mobile, yet at the same time it's still simple and easy to play its rotation. But unfortunately, the build diversity with Rogue is extremely lackluster. Basically, there are two types of builds. You have melee with imbuements and range with imbuements. The biggest issue here is that you are constantly relying on your cooldowns, and if you don't have an imbuement skill active, then you're basically dealing no damage at all. This is why pretty much every Rogue build will run either 2 or even all 3 imbuements along with Poison Trap to reset their cooldowns against bosses, which in my opinion ends up absolutely killing the build diversity. But if you find yourself to actually like the imbuement heavy playstyle, Rogue is a very solid all-around class, can do pretty much any content, and I would definitely recommend it. Lastly, there's the Druid. I have the least amount of time played with the Druid by far, but I'll cover what I can. Druid is arguably the worst class to level with by far, yet it's also arguably the strongest class at the end game when you manage to finally gear it out. Druids also probably have the most build diversity of any class because they have so many different unique items that will completely change the type of their skills and how they interact. And a unique advantage of playing Druid that most people don't actually talk about or consider is you don't really have to worry about wanting MTX since you'll be in the animal form most of the time anyways. Overall, I would say that Druid is a very solid alt character, but I would definitely not recommend playing it as your starter because it's just so gear investment heavy, and actually leveling on it without any good aspects or viable uniques is just complete trash. Run it as an alt, but do not start with it. So now that the game has been out for about a month or so now, how do I actually think Blizzard is handling the game? Well, I think that so far it's actually been handled quite well. The devs seem to be acknowledging all the problems there are with the game, and they seem to be willing to fix them. There are things that I won't change, and I'd prefer to have at least like a world tier 5 to somewhat alleviate the poor level 80 to 100 section, but I know it wouldn't change much of the problem. And if we're being honest here, the real problem with Blizzard games has always been that whenever they want to update something, it's always like kinda questionable in terms of balance and on what I like to call Blizzard time. Fixes when the game first released were super fast and drastic. There were character interactions nerfed left and right, monster spawns reduced, items were changed, aspects were nerfed, bug fixes, crash fixes, whatever the hell. But then when the first big patch almost a month in was actually released, it was just honestly lackluster. I mean, there were some conservative micro buffs to certain abilities, and the increase in Nightmare Dungeon XP, which I will say was a big positive, is not something that should have taken this long to implement. The main issue I have is that the problems that really need addressing immediately, and they shouldn't really take that long to fix, are taking absolutely forever, and any meaningful updates will only be like once per season. A prime example of this is with the gym changes, which are, let's be honest here, a problem that they could really alleviate in like 10 minutes by increasing the stack size, but instead it's going to take Blizzard 2 whole seasons, which, you know, we don't even know the date for season 1, but approximately 5-ish months to solve. Why? Were they just planning on selling us the solution with the gym tab, and now they're like, oh, I guess we can't get away with that one anymore? It's problems like these that should be solved and out of the way so the actual development focus can be on new and interesting content, but overall I do think that the outlook for the game is still good. Blizzard really did a great job at laying the groundwork for Diablo 4, and the core gameplay is already fantastic here. I guess it's really just a matter of how many players the game bleeds by the time we reach the good new content. To quickly summarize my thoughts, since I'm not very good at laying these videos out, MTX isn't bad yet. The campaign experience is very solid, the story is good, cinematics are good, gameplay feels really good. Half of the open world content is good, the other half is questionable, but in general the overall level 1 to 80 experience is good, but everything after that is where the game's problematic currently. The classes are all solid with a few minor hiccups here and there in regards to build diversity and some balance. I think Blizzard is handling the game quite well, although a bit slow, and overall, while I don't have a standard procedure for this, I would give the game a drumroll please 4 out of 10. Nah, I'm just kidding, 4 out of 5. It's a perfectly good game right now, but catch me a couple seasons from now when it actually gets much better. Thanks for watching this video. It took me way longer than it should have to get this review together, mainly because I wanted to spend a good chunk of time experiencing the game across a few different classes before giving my full thoughts. I'll probably make an update to this video sometime after Season 1 releases, so if you're watching this in like 2 months or something, check out my channel for that. I have more reviews coming soon that shouldn't take anywhere near as long as this one did, so stay tuned for those, and consider checking out my community tab, because that's where I post updates and teasers for the upcoming vids. And yeah, goodbye.